therefore had existed for 25 years, but for the last decade or so had been pretty much inactive. I'd consider myself a member of it once I moved out here to California, but Phyllis wasn't particularly active in doing initiations and formal lodge-sponsored activities in the later years of her life. So when she passed the mastership to me in the spring of 2004, which was about a month before her death, we've really since that time emphasized getting ourselves functioning as a lodge should function, making sure masses are happening regularly, making sure that classes are occurring, making sure that initiations are available, and really building back an OTO community here in Sacramento, which hadn't really had a body for several years.
Now, you've put out a publication recently as 418?
The first issue of our journal, Keth, as in the Hebrew letter Keth, came out late last year, and we're accepting submissions for the second volume, which we expect to be out within the next 6 months or so.
And what format is that in? A book or just saddle stitch?
It is a perfect bound, small format, perfect bound book, somewhat like a literary journal.
Okay.
With some very nice artwork. And this particular issue features a lot of Phyllis's art and poetry. So it's kind of a memorial issue for her, but that's the format.
Okay. Well, let's move to the Psychology Guild. When did that get founded?
Right about the time that I was getting into magic, the first 2-3 years after joining the OTO in 93, I read about the concept of the guilds from the Constitution and such, and realized there was that one of the guilds that might be most useful and most inherently kind of overlapping with magic and mysticism would be a psychology guild. And maybe that's just my own bias, but it seemed pretty obvious. And so I started writing to various folks to check out the idea and see who would be interested. And Sabasius and Sor Helena from the very beginning were very supportive of developing the guild. So we started working, writing up the bylaws, and on that score we had a lot of assistance from the Translators Guild bylaws, which had been around for a year or two at that point. So we wrote up the bylaws, and then it was formally approved. The guild was formally approved in the spring of 2000. And since that time, we've done a journal, one volume of a journal called Neshama, and which is now sold out, but hope to do another one here in the next year. And we've got about 20 members internationally. Of course, the Guild is an international body. And right now, the project that certainly is at the center of our work is the Pastoral Counseling workshops that we're doing around the country. Okay.
What are the pastoral workshops that you're doing?
Well, basically, the idea started with the recognition that out there in the field, in any town, USA, where there's an OTO body, there are people in that setting who, no matter what their training, no matter what their background, no matter what their degree, they are kind of the de facto spiritual leaders of the community, the OTO EGC community. There's someone who's going to walk into that community as a Minerval and see that there's a priest or priestess up there doing these functions, and like it or not, they're going to be seen as the authority, likely going to be seen as the authority figure there, and they're going to come across people who come to them for advice or come to them with a problem or simply manifest a problem in the community, and that's going to have to be dealt with by someone. I came up with the idea of starting these workshops in order to do the training for body masters and for ordained clergy to be prepared for what they will find themselves doing, because I think it's inevitable that these issues will arise.
And what kind of issues do the clergy within the EGC of the OTO get from the various members? What kind of things are you preparing them for?
Well, the workshops themselves cover a few key areas. One of them, of course, is basic counseling skills, listening skills, understanding how to approach their community members, not as a therapist doing long-term work for change and healing in terms of actual psychiatric diagnoses and that sort of thing, but in terms of support, empathy. Another component of the workshops is making sure that our folks know enough about psychiatric diagnosis in a basic way so that they can detect if someone is having a more serious issue that might need a referral to resources in the community. We also go over legal and ethical issues. A major example of that was featured in an article in Agape a while back was the issue of mandatory reporting of child abuse and neglect. And in many states, clergy, which for us would include ordained priests, priestesses, and bishops, are mandated reporters of child abuse. And so issues like that certainly there needs to be education about that.
Now, there has been some criticism of the pastoral counseling that the OTO is going out and doing these kind of counseling sessions, but that the clergy themselves are really kind of ignorant about the EGC and Gnosticism and things like that. Do you see that as a problem, or what's your kind of response to that criticism?
Well, I think training is always multifaceted, and we identified a need, and at the time of identifying a need, we also had a body that could exist to help work on that. So we identified that pastoral counseling was a useful thing to do. We identified that the guild was there with clinically trained members to do it, and the resources were available. So I think it's a question of working with what you have and can easily implement. Certainly doesn't diminish the importance of rounding out the training in other ways.
So where do you see the Psychology Guild going with the counseling sessions? Is that going to be something that rotates and you do twice a year, kind of like what the OTO does with the Qabalah, or is it going to become a more elaborate, documented process, or are you still just kind of working out the initial details?
Well, we've done one beta test, as I like to call it, in this last summer, and then we've done 3 workshops in Los Angeles, Austin, and Portland so far. They've been roughly quarterly, and it's similar to a Qabalah model of showing up with a panel of presenters, usually 2 or 3, and doing a full weekend-long workshop experience. And in terms of where to take it from here, we're still trying to make one complete pass around all the geographic areas in the country. I'd really like to hit the upper Midwest and the Southeast at this point. We have one scheduled for New York City in September. And so we're trying to hit everybody in the first pass with that and make sure that everyone's had access to at least come to one of them. It's not going to be a certification program. We're not saying that someone is trained as a pastoral counselor after one weekend. What we're doing is trying to get some minimal exposure to these tools and to the education aspect of it. In the future, if someone has a counseling credential, and as there are more and more pagan-oriented or pagan-friendly seminaries existing out there, it may very well be possible to have some of our clergy be formally accredited as pastoral counselors. But that's a bit down the road.
What are some of the other things that the Psychology Guild is thinking? You said they're coming out with another Neshma in the near future. Are there some other kind of programs that you're thinking of, or is this pretty much your main concentration right now?
Well, let me describe a little bit more about what we envisioned the Guild to be when it was first started. I think that would help.
Okay.
First of all, it's not purely clinically oriented. It wasn't designed to be a psychotherapy or psychotherapist guild. It was designed to be, broadly speaking, psychology and frankly even bridging into other social sciences type of the guild. So we have people who are trained in research, social science research, social psychologists, other experimental psychologists. We have psychiatrists. We have graduate students in all these fields. So it's really designed to be something where we're bringing together people who, from all those various backgrounds, recognizing that there are overlaps between magic and psychology in the way that therapy would manifest, in the way that research could be done. Richard Kaczynski's done some excellent writing for us and is an example of a research-oriented psychologist who is exploring the interface with magic from that direction. So I see there's all kinds of possibilities in terms of other ways to go with this, but right now the workshops were fulfilling a need, and so that is the main focus right now.
Okay, well, I really appreciate you being on the show. I think it's important for people to know what's going on with the EGC and the pastoral counseling, and some people were not aware of 418 Lodge and what it's doing, so just kind of get all of this on some people's radar and so that they can participate if necessary.
Right.
Well, thanks again.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
All right, 93.
I want to thank David for coming on the podcast. It's really important that people know what's going on with the OTO guilds and the other things that are going on with the local bodies. I know the Psychology Guild has been really moving forward with the Pastoral Counseling program, and there has been a lot of positive feedback about that. So it's great that he could be on the show. The next interview is with Keith 418. In this one, Keith and I talk about confrontation within the thelemic community. There has been some interesting patterns that we've noticed about people not really being able to confront others about problems and not really expressing how they feel. There's also a lot of misunderstanding about what we mean when we say confrontation, so Keith talks about that too. So here's our conversation about confrontation within the thelemic community.
Keith, welcome back to the podcast, 93.
93, John. Thanks for having me.
One of the things you and I were talking about recently is conflict within the thelemic community and how people are conflict averse. We find this out when a lot of people listen to the podcast and really dislike the confrontational tones that you and I have towards various leadership groups and other organizations. Why do you think they are so conflict
I think you need to start out by making a differentiation between conflict and confrontation. I don't always think the community is conflict averse. I mean, people like a good fight. What they don't want to do is confront each other, and that's kind of a different issue. One of the actual Grand Lodge officers brought this up with me not too long ago, that he said we have a very confrontation adverse community, that people complain about other people behind the scenes and behind their backs, but they don't actually confront these people directly. And I started thinking about this because I looked at the way Crowley really wanted Thelemites to behave at Qabalah, and he writes about this both in Qabalah and also after he left, after Mussolini booted him out of Italy, in Tunis. And his whole attitude is that people should be very frank with each other and should confront each other if there's a problem. And in discussing this with some friends, they brought up some really interesting issues about empowered people feeling that they can confront each other openly and directly, and what that really involves. And often one of the things I found is that people confuse confrontation with resolution. I mean, oftentimes a confrontation between two people doesn't always result in a resolution. And so when people say, well, I don't want to confront X individual or I don't want to confront Y individual, often it's because they don't really see that there's going to be a resolution. But Crowley says it's just important to clear the air, to know where everybody stands, to be frank with each other so that you have as much information as possible. And this is one of the things that I see being a real problem in the community. It's not just the fact that no one really wants to confront each other directly. And we saw that, actually, you'll recall this in the Kowalczyk study.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Remember, she points out that you could screw up really badly in the community and blow a major project and no one would ever confront you.
Exactly.
Because the whole community's whole take on Thelema is, we can't judge anyone else, and if you can't judge anyone else, you can't really confront them.
Well, actually, you can judge. You just can't have a negative judgment. So you can give praise all day long and judge something wonderful and successful and pat them on the back. Everyone says, that's great. But if you say, this sucks, or this is bad, or this isn't good, then people come down on you. So they're not really judgment averse. They're negative judgment averse.
Negative judgment averse, right. Everything, that's exactly correct. So we look at this and we say, well, how did it get this way, and what do we do to stop it? And I brought this up with a friend of mine who's no longer really in the community, and he said that it's naive to think that there can be this transparent accountability that will accede to confrontation across the board. And basically what that means, I think, is that, or how I interpret that, was that it's naive to think that a Minerval is going to go up to a 6th-degree OTO member and say, your behavior at this last event was totally appalling, and I want you to know that I think it's completely unacceptable and you had no right to, run around with a banana on your head drunk out of your mind with your pants down. Or whatever. I mean, I'm just making something up. And he said, look, the confrontations can only exist when there's a power relationship which would support the confrontation. And the question I think we need to ask ourselves, was Crowley really being naive? Was he insisting that people confront each other without that sort of power? Or was his vision of the kind of person he wanted in the Thelema community somebody that was so sure of themselves and so strong that not only could they go and confront people who were their, quote, superiors, unquote, but that also they could do it and be confronted?
Mm-hmm.
It's not just, the person having the guts to go and confront someone. It's somebody who could stand to be confronted. And I mean, I think one of the reasons why more people don't confront us